One of my first major part time jobs was at a grocery store, back when I was a junior in high school and more socially awkward than I am now, but just as sleep deprived. I saw this as a convenient opportunity to build my resume, and it was easy money. I was very familiar with the store and how the employees ranged from 16 to 50 years old. They sold high end products, which meant it wasn't sketchy. So I decided to give it a try, and sure enough, I got the job as a cashier. The first couple of weeks weren't so bad. I had to indicate my beginner skills with a training sign at the end of the register, and customers took it easy on me. Kind of like a student driver license plate, but more pleasant. But this was orientation. A couple months in, I was familiar with the basic procedures of checking people out. I just wasn't prepared for spending 8 hours a day actually interacting with people. On one day, there was an old man who had a large load to purchase. I gave him my usual greetings and spiel about his day, and he was rather quiet, so I kept to swiping the merchandise. Until there was this one large bag at the corner of my eye. It stood out of place of the other boxed items, and I assumed it had something fragile, and as per store policy, we either bag fragile things separate or rubber band them. So I paused to examine the contents of the bag, and staring back at me were two beady eyes of a live lobster. I screamed and jumped back, alerting the entire front of the store. The employee who was bagging for me took like 5 minutes to calm me down and explain to me how the store sold live lobsters. And I thought I knew a lot about the store's merch, but who sells live lobsters in bags? Seriously. What was unsettling after that was that the man buying the lobster started teasing me on how they might jump out of the plastic and pinch my fingers off. There was another major mess up when I talked too long with a nice customer who was making a large purchase. As I chatted and bagged, since nobody cared to let me in a hand, she provided a couple bags of her own, ones that were made of tougher fabric than the paper and plastic ones in the store, so you could fit a good amount of items in each one. Before I knew it, I bagged everything and wished the woman a nice day. As I watched her wheel the cart to the exit and take the bags out to carry, my heart sank. Talking made me disregard the weight of the bags. When I realized that I had fit way too many items into her bags, I could only watch in embarrassment as the woman was hunched over, dragging her bags out the door, all the way to her car, which I hoped was parked close enough. I felt very incompetent. What I thought would be a simple job turned out to be so much more, and I found myself getting more confused. 3 to 4 months in, I started having situations where the customer happened to be in a sour mood, and it would get to me. The situations usually made it seem like they wanted someone to blame for their troubled attitude, and I, looking as sleepy and pissed as usual, was the perfect target. So I would adopt what I've come to know as my resting bitch face. Besides getting fuming customers, I'd also see a couple of stragglers who'd get the wrong idea on my ethnic background. I would like to mention I was pretty much the only employee working there with some visible Asian background. One guy came up to me in particular and asked what I thought was the best rice vinegar. I like cooking, but I didn't even know that rice could be a vinegar at that point in time, so I pointed at the prettiest one. Then there was one woman who says to me before she leaves, "Happy New Year." "I'm sorry," I said, confused because it was February. "Happy Chinese New Year." She looks at me expecting a moment of recognition and gratitude that someone knew my culture. But I just put on my resting bitch face and said blatantly, "I'm not Chinese, ma'am. Have a nice day." I was getting even more frustrated going to work, to the point where I didn't even want to get out of my car. I could just drive somewhere else and get coffee, go back home in uniform, and nobody would notice. Except my boss, which was fine by me because I wasn't too fond of their militaristic attitude. But my parents were well aware of my depressed attitude towards work, and the fact that my grades slipped a bit. I thought this was more of an incentive to quit. I was just getting sick of dealing with ignorant people and having to pretend that the customer was always right. However, my mom and dad encouraged me to keep at it and said, "You never know someone's situation unless you walk a mile in their shoes," and that there are always two sides to every story. With their encouragement, I kept at it, and gradually, to my surprise, things started to get a bit easier. I started noticing certain things about the customers who would come continuously, some at the same time each week, others maybe even every night 10 minutes before the store closed. I discovered how some regulars prefer their items bagged, or even if they didn't want others to bag for them. I also picked up on how some would even start up the same conversations every visit. There was this one older woman who would always come in the store with a mask on that covered the lower half of her face, and every time I had her for checking out, she'd stare at me and assume that I was always interested in her mask, and explain in a muffled voice how she was getting dental work done. Paying attention to these encounters made work less unbearable, despite the occasional rude moments. I focused more on observing regulars and contributed what I learned from helping them out to new customers. One day, I was checking out this middle aged woman who looked uncomfortably quiet, kind of reminiscent of me in my depressed phase. So I went for it and straight up told her she didn't seem okay, which I probably never would have done a couple months back. But surprisingly, the woman looked at me and cried, saying that her dog had just passed. Having lost my dog a couple months before, I understood her pain. I stopped everything, went around the counter, and gave her a hug, which held with the line, but I didn't care. She thanked me and seemed less sad than before, which made me feel kind of proud that I decided to care. And finally, I started picking up on random acts of kindness, where someone who I'd never met would happen to do something that'd make my day. Around Thanksgiving time, when people fought for turkeys and food, and lines would reach into the aisles, there was a woman who, at the last minute, grabbed a pack of Reese's cups and placed it on the treadmill. This seemed like a generic impulse buy until she was leaving and didn't pick it up from the belt. I stopped her so that she wouldn't forget it, and she said they were for me and wished me a happy Thanksgiving. To explain how touched and taken aback I was, I wouldn't even eat those cups on my 15-minute breaks. I waited till I got home, like a total weirdo, and savored the chocolate peanut buttery goodness. So, I remained a cashier for a lot longer than I thought. My new hobby in observing others and picking up on their habits helped keep things interesting at work and taught me mainly how everyone is different, that you shouldn't assume things unless you've been in their shoes. But in a way, I've learned that also everyone is similar and that we are all human. So nowadays, I'm more careful and respectful of employees, especially towards those in retail, since I know it isn't always easy being in their place, constantly acting like the customer is always right. I'm just glad I don't work as a cashier anymore.